Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon for our webinar about the Education Technology and Opportunity Innovation Competition at JPAL. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly introduce myself and my co-presenters. My name is Vincent Kwan. I am a policy manager at JPAL North America and also the initiative manager for the Education Technology and Opportunity Initiative. Joining me is Peter Bergman, a professor of economics and education at Columbia University's Teachers College, and Vincent Baxter, the deputy chief of family engagement in the DC Public Schools. I want to begin with a few housekeeping items. Everyone who's attending has been muted, but we do encourage you to use the chat function as we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar. And we will be recording the presentation and we'll be posting it on the website within a week. So please keep your questions on hand. An overview for the webinar, we're going to begin by spending a few minutes introducing JPAL and the work that we and our affiliated academic researchers do. We are then going to introduce the JPAL Education Technology and Opportunity Initiative and then go into a discussion for opportunities for randomized evaluations. Peter and Vincent will then walk through a randomized evaluation in practice and share some of the insights they have from doing a randomized evaluation in the DC Public Schools. And then at the end of the webinar, we are going to discuss how to apply for the EdTech competition and what selected participants are eligible to receive. And of course, we will leave ample time at the end for a Q&A session. So who are we? JPAL is a research center at MIT whose mission is to reduce poverty by ensuring that policy is informed by rigorous scientific evidence. And as reflected in this map, JPAL works all around the world. JPAL North America is where we sit, and we're based in Cambridge at MIT, and we're a regional office of JPAL. We also have regional offices in Africa, Europe, Latin America, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. And so JPAL specializes in impact evaluation of social programs. And when I say that we tackle poverty, we approach poverty through a broad lens and work on a wide range of policy areas that may impact poverty. For example, education, healthcare, crime and violence, labor and employment, agriculture, energy, and many other topic areas. And what distinguishes JPAL from other research institutions is our sole focus on using randomized evaluations to figure out which programs work, which work best, and why. And to date, we've done nearly 900 ongoing and completed randomized evaluations in 80 countries. And if you take a look at the map, some of the colored dots reflect the types of studies that we've done all around the world. And JPAL's randomized evaluations are led by our network of more than 150 affiliated professors from 49 universities. They produce the research by leading the evaluations as principal investigators. And so while JPAL is based at MIT, the affiliated researchers in our network who carry out these randomized evaluations can sit at universities all around the world. And what unites all of these professors is their use of randomized evaluations as part of their research portfolio to evaluate the impact of social programs. So these are all academics who have a commitment towards using randomized evaluations to figure out which social programs are really moving the dial in terms of reducing poverty. And JPAL-affiliated researchers have experience conducting randomized evaluations in the field with all of the complexities and challenges of doing policy-relevant research in the real world. So now that you've learned a little bit about what JPAL is as an organization, I'd like to walk you through the new JPAL Education Technology and Opportunity Initiative. The JPAL Education Technology and Opportunity Initiative is a new initiative at JPAL North America that supports U.S. education leaders in generating evidence on how and to what extent uses of technology and innovation can improve student learning. And so you might be wondering, why focus on education technology? Given all of the areas that JPAL has worked on that relate to poverty, why is education technology the new frontier of work for JPAL as an organization? Well, we all know that education has long been viewed as a springboard to a more productive and more fulfilling life. And over the past decade, there has been an overall rise in educational attainment in the United States. However, tremendous disparities in educational achievement continue to exist in this country. And oftentimes we see that educational achievement is being held back, especially for communities of color and also disadvantaged and low-income communities. And so education technology has the potential to help overcome many of the existing challenges in education that we've long considered intractable, and has the potential to reduce some of the gaps that we currently see in our educational system. Both the public and the private sectors recognize this, and there's been massive investments in education technology as a potential solution to some of the challenges that we see in education. By 2020, investments in education technology, hardware, and software are projected to reach $21 billion. So there's a lot of excitement being poured into EdTech as a solution. But at the same time, while we celebrate a lot of the innovation that we see in education technology, we also know that many programs are untested, and not everything that we try is necessarily going to work. And in order to truly harness the potential of education technology to really move the dial in education, we need rigorous evidence, and we need to invest in rigorous evidence to figure out which solutions go beyond the hype and truly are going to make a difference. And ultimately, it's important to get it right. Identifying and investing in education technology that works is more than just testing whether or not it works for the sake of testing whether or not it works, but in fact can help us make massive inroads for student achievement. So what are the goals of the JPAL Education Technology and Opportunity Initiative after you've heard a little bit of that background? Well, given our focus on randomized evaluations, one key goal of the initiative is to catalyze randomized evaluations of promising uses of education technology and innovation. We're also seeking to build the capacity of leaders in education to use data and evaluation and to generate rigorous evidence of their programs. And through this initiative, we're hoping to create a cohort of leaders who can really advance the use of rigorous evidence in education for decision-making. And of course, we don't want to do research for the sake of doing research. We want to make sure that the research that we do is actionable and gets into the hands of decision makers such as yourself who are well positioned to act on this rigorous research to generate solutions to critical challenges in education. So now I've talked a little bit about randomized evaluations. And so I want to walk you through what are randomized evaluations and what might be some good opportunities to do randomized evaluations in the real world. So randomized evaluations are one of many tools to measure the impact of programs. And when done correctly, randomized evaluations can be a very powerful way to answer the question, what is the effect of your program? But of course, as I mentioned, it is one tool in a broader toolbox of evaluation methods. While we at JPAL specialize in the use of randomized evaluations to figure out which programs are effective, we certainly don't advocate for its use in every single setting. And the right evaluation method will of course depend on the question you're trying to answer and the context in which you are working. But one role that JPAL really plays is that we help nonprofits, governments, folks from the philanthropic sector figure out when randomized evaluations might be a good fit to figure out whether or not your program is effective and how you might be able to set up your program in a way to be evaluated through a randomized evaluation. So let's walk through an easy example of a randomized evaluation. Let's say you're a district administrator who's interested in measuring the impact of a new untested online computer program on student math scores. What you could do is first pick the population that is eligible to receive the program, for example, all sixth graders. And then you would split the eligible population into two groups at random, let's say through a lottery. One group would receive the online computer program, and this is what we call the treatment group, and the other group would receive the status quo, or business as usual, and this is what we call the control group. And if randomization is done correctly, then the two groups on average should be statistically identical to one another, with the exception of one key aspect, that one group receives the online computer program, otherwise known as the treatment. And so in this instance, you know that you are making an apples-to-apples comparison. And so after a period of time, you can compare outcomes between the two groups. So let's say math scores between the two groups. And any differences in math scores between the two groups can be attributed to the program and not to something else. And this is why randomization can be such a powerful, effective, and also convincing tool, because it can really help you isolate the impact of the program in question and can really help you answer the question, what is the effect of my program? And we know that it is due to the program and not something else that we see any observed impact. So when might you consider randomization? We have a couple rules of thumb here at JPAL that we think could be a helpful framework for thinking about when randomization is appropriate. For example, if you have an unstudied or an understudied program where there is no strong supporting rigorous evidence for a program, this might be something that is actually really beneficial to study through a rigorous evaluation. Secondly, if a program or a service is oversubscribed. For many programs, there may not be enough resources at the moment to serve everyone who is eligible. In many cases, program administrators may determine who receives the program on a first-come, first-served basis. But a first-come, first-served basis is not inherently fair. For example, those who sign up for a program first may simply have more engaged parents or more affluent parents. And using a lottery can, in fact, sometimes be a fairer way to determine who receives a program if a program is, in fact, oversubscribed. Also, with program expansion, if you are moving into a new area and there's a program that's already well-defined that's been tried elsewhere, and you're trying to see whether or not this program is going to work in this specific context, you can roll it out in a way that's randomized and allows you to really learn something about the impact of the program as you're rolling it out into a new location. Similarly, if you're adding a new feature of a program, let's say if you're adding an online component or a component that entails tutoring, you can roll out the new feature in a way that's randomized, and that allows you to really test whether or not that additional feature is going to lead to any positive impact. And lastly, if there are program thresholds and cutoffs. Some programs already use a sharp cutoff criteria, such as minimum GPA, to get into a program. And if you're interested in the impact of the program, you can actually use this as an opportunity to test the impact on the kids right around the cutoff through randomization. And so, of course, these are just a few rules of thumb. And JPAL as an organization, we really help our partners understand when randomization might be appropriate and what type of randomization might be appropriate. But at the same time, as I mentioned, randomized evaluations don't necessarily make sense. And there are a few instances when randomization might be something that might not be as appropriate. For example, if it's too small. If you happen to have too small of a sample size, in some cases, the program might be just serving too small of a group for you to be able to say anything meaningful about whether or not your program is effective. Or it might be too early. In some cases, the program might not be well-defined enough, or it's just too early in its development to be evaluated through a randomized evaluation. And if things are constantly changing with the program, a randomized evaluation could be a bit more difficult to implement. However, I do want to caveat that you shouldn't take these warnings as basically me telling you that you should opt out of considering a randomized evaluation. We, as JPAL, can help be the arbiters of this and help you figure out when it's appropriate. And ultimately, it's never too early to talk about evaluation and to consider how you might incorporate evaluation into the rollout of your program. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask us if it's still appropriate. And if it's too late, sometimes it can be difficult. If you're already serving everyone who is eligible and no random assignment was built in, a randomized evaluation might not make as much sense. And ultimately, when a positive impact of a program has already been proven and you have the resources to serve everyone, it simply would not be ethical to withhold this program to some people and give it to some other people. So if you do already have rigorous evidence indicating that this is a good program and you do have enough resources to serve everyone, then a randomized evaluation would be less appropriate. So now I want to hand it over to my co-presenters, Peter and Vincent, who are going to walk through an actual example of a randomized evaluation that they did in DC public schools relating to family engagement.
Great, thanks, Vincent. So let me just move the slides over. So I'm Peter Bergman. I'm a professor of economics and education at Columbia University Teachers College. A lot of my work involves field experiments, and often I'm partnering with companies and school districts to run interventions aimed at improving education outcomes, especially for low-income families. Some examples are work with NGrade and McGraw-Hill in collaboration with DC Public Schools and Vincent Baxter. Also worked with GoSection8.com to provide information on school quality to low-income families. We also have partnerships with 6UP, where we're looking at introducing randomization into loans for low-income, high-achieving students. So familiar with working both the school districts and the data and constraints often faced by companies who are focused on education outcomes. Vincent, feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. This is Vincent Baxter in Washington, D.C. I lead family engagement work for DC Public Schools. I used to be a DCPS teacher. I was a principal for a time. So my work largely is about shifting our whole educational workforce's mindsets and skill sets relative to how teachers partner with families to improve academic outcomes for kids. Basically any project in that zone that might come up in a DC public school, I'm all about it. And I mean, this is important work, and not only in DCPS, but nationwide in urban schools and elsewhere, because we know it works, and folks like Peter help us understand better how it works and how it adds up to improved outcomes for kids. But they're not teaching teachers or principals how to work in this way in schools often. So, the more in fine-tuned ways we can understand exactly what actions lead to better outcomes for kids, that's kind of what we're all about.
Fantastic. Thanks, Vincent. And through the partnership we're about to discuss, I'd say Vincent and I have become pretty good friends, and this partnership around parent engagement is perfect in segue or based on what Vincent just said. So following up, there's a lot of evidence that we know parents matter, and the intervention technology I'm going to discuss as an example today focuses on how to empower parents. So parents are interesting because they're both a really important determinant of education outcomes, but also an important determinant of inequality in outcomes. If you ask Americans what's going to improve education the most, 52% cite more parental involvement. That's more often than effective teachers and rewards and test prep. What's interesting is up until a few years ago when I started doing this research, there's actually surprisingly little evidence-based practices on how to effectively engage parents. And there's more about early childhood, certainly, but much less by the time kids are coming into middle and high school. So I've done a lot of background research to motivate this, and some of the findings we found are that there are particularly striking information gaps between parents, children, and schools. So if you ask parents how satisfied they are with their school-to-parent communication, national surveys have found that only 43% of parents are satisfied in schools that tend to send many fewer students on to college. But in schools where most kids do go on to college, 83% of parents are satisfied with the communication they get from their child's school about their academic progress. We've surveyed parents about their understanding of the A through F grading system in several school districts. In Los Angeles schools, we did a small survey. We found 11% didn't have a firm understanding of the A through F grading system. So we were saying to parents, hey, your child's getting a D, but there are parents who are uncertain about what exactly that grade meant. For a lot of families who have recently immigrated to the U.S., they're coming from systems that don't use A through F grading systems. We also asked parents to guess how many assignments their child has missed, and we can check this based on grade books from the teachers, and parents vastly understate the number of assignments their child has missed. It's not uncommon that they're understating this by an order of magnitude, 10 or more assignments. Parents also are unsure how many absences their child has and understate those absences as well. They don't know frequently how many report cards they're supposed to get. And in a survey of parents in the largest school district in West Virginia, they were hearing from their child's school less than one time every 3 months on average. So some striking information problems between parents, kids, and their schools. So the intervention that we developed is to provide parents with timely, actionable information about all their child's missed assignments, absences, and low grades. And we are using a technology through another partner, an LMS system, learning management system called nGrade. And this is based on work I had done on Los Angeles, where I was literally texting this information out by hand on my cell phones, and then I partnered with the folks at nGrade to develop an automated system that could push out information on how many assignments a child had missed each week in a class, how many absences a child had had each week for each class, and once a month we'd push out information about low grades that a student had as well. So DCPS had purchased this system, and they're using it in 12 of their schools, or they purchased it as a pilot for 12 of their schools. And I think Vincent can add some context here to what was going on with the system.
Yeah, first of all, nGrade at the time was a kind of like a really kind of like lean, nimble, smaller organization, and so they were really interested to learn more about how teachers and parents were or were not using the product. So for a time, right, with Peter in the mix too, this was really kind of like at least a three-channel kind of like little research team, and we had this dashboard so we could see in kind of like real-time way during a given day or from one day to the next, whether parents were logging on, whether teachers were logging on, and they weren't. Like we'd purchased this system, we're trying to nudge all of their behavior into actually like using this open channel to communicate with each other. About when kids were missing assignments, et cetera. So enter Peter, Peter, like how you said that we've become friends over time. Actually, the first time I met Peter, he had been collaborating with a researcher at Harvard named Todd Rogers, and they have like a very friendly, ongoing working relationship. And so, I mean, I think I can talk more about that part in the future. I'll let you get back to talking about the actual project, but certainly our ongoing collaboration has led to lots of other fun opportunities for both of us. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Thanks, Vincent. So that's right. So the basic fundamental question here was, the system is in place. We've actually done some other efficacy research on this intervention in several other cities and school districts where we had shown that this sort of intervention can cut course failures by 40%, improve class attendance. But the issue here was, okay, if we have something that works, how can we actually make sure that schools or families use it? And so Vincent approached me saying, hey, maybe there's some scope for a research partnership. And so we can discuss this further, but Vincent was instrumental in really getting this off the ground. It wouldn't have happened without him, with the introductions to the research office at DCPS and facilitating our ability to draw information there and get that process sped along and prioritized was huge, because that requires some communication channels with the school district back and forth about questions about how are you going to get information. And then, the fact that we're doing research in the district and saying that DCPS has initiated this research is also instrumental for us in terms of what sort of consent we need and our IRB approval. And so, Vincent, maybe you can talk a bit more about how this differs from some of the other research collaborations you've had.
Yeah, sure. Actually, in the same era that Peter and I were doing this project together, we were in another project with a great partnership with a for-profit research partner where we were doing a larger scale randomized control trial project. It actually not related to a tech platform, but related to a professional development project that we do with teachers at a pretty big scale in our family engagement work. And I think that, like, I'm not talking out of school here. The researchers that we've worked with in those settings too would tell you the same thing. These are projects, these big long-term randomized control trials. They can be lengthy and long and expensive. Partnering on a shorter term A/B trial or in this case a randomized control trial where we understood things really quickly. I mean, it was advantageous to us. I won't speak for Peter. I do know that when we partner with professors generally, we as a public school district we have this great resource of information to bear, which I think in the grand scheme of things is far more valuable to people who are curious than the actual money that it takes to run one of these bigger kind of projects. And I think too, from my time as when I was studying, when I was in the PhD program, we would hear these kind of caution flags. It's challenging to partner with public school districts because of the data offices are oftentimes not responsive or more challenging to work with. I think that because I'm an inside actor who's setting my own kind of curiosity agenda, my letter of kind of support and recommendation, to Peter's point, it goes a long way at Columbia with their IRB, and it kind of paves the way in-house here as well.
Thanks, Vincent. That's perfect. And we thought this was a nice example because it does involve the partnership with DCPS, but it also involved this partnership with NGRADE, and I can speak a little bit about that and how that worked as well. So, one thing that was great, I think, both from DCPS's standpoint and the researcher's standpoint in the partnership with the learning management system is we could take some of the onus of getting data from DCPS directly, and with DCPS's approval, thanks to Vincent's help, we get the data directly from NGRADE. So NGRADE had information on all the alerts that were going out. They could help us do the randomization, meaning once we've selected families to turn alerts on for, they could find out, they could tell us, they could actually send those alerts, turn it on for families. And they had, since they were also this gradebook provider for the district, we could pull outcome data directly from the learning management system, NGRADE, as well, which just meant we could sort of more or less, once we had DCPS's approval, we could run pretty much everything through the NGRADE platform, which really facilitated the research, just made it a lot faster and sort of lighter on its feet, so to speak, because we could go through one particular channel. So I'll talk a bit more about the research design now. So the basic idea, and maybe I'll skip to this slide first so you can get a sense of what's actually going on, is we wanted to figure out how can we help parents start to use this intervention. So rather than work directly with the schools, maybe we can have parents turn it on directly in some fashion. So the standard way that the LMS families that could turn on the system through the LMS was through this website, the parent portal where families can log on to view their kids' grades. They can also click to turn on these alerts. So we randomized one group of families into this standard opt-in condition, and we sent out a notification saying, hey, you may enroll in this platform, this new service we have by logging in at this website, and you can call your school if you need your account information as well. We had another group which we called the simplified opt-in group, where we made it a little bit easier for families to opt in. We said, hey, we've got this new platform. It allows you to receive information about all your child's missed assignments, grades, absences, etc. And you can turn it on just by texting us back the word start. So we call that the simplified condition. And then lastly, we had the opt-out condition, which was, hey, we've got this new platform, we're going to turn it on for you. If you want us to stop it at any point, including now, just text us back the word stop, and we would shut it off for those families. So once we define the conditions, here's sort of how the randomization works. So we've got all families in 12 schools, which you can see on the far left side here. Families are really eligible or not just based on whether they had a cell phone number in the DCPS system. So around 60% of the phone numbers in the student information system were cell phones, which you can tell by the 3-digit prefix. And so, obviously we can't send text messages to those who don't have a cell phone. And so what we did is, among those who had cell phone, we said are eligible, we randomized them into this. At the top, you can see the opt-in via the website, the standard condition, opt-in via the text message, which was our simplified condition, and opt-out via text message. And then we had a control, which was basically the business as usual. We didn't have any new information for the families. They could still log on to the parent portal and turn it on themselves if they'd like, but we didn't sort of actively prompt them to do so. And for each of these groups, we would then track subsequently if they turned on the alert system or if they remain enrolled in the alert system in the case of the opt-out group. And all that the enrollment data we could get straight from NGrade. So from the learning management system, as I said, we could get the phone numbers, we could get the enrollment in the program, we could track text message delivery, we could look at course grades through the gradebook system, which was all the same learning management system. We also did a one-question follow-up survey, which we sort of manually programmed in through the NGrade Twilio platform. And this follow-up survey was just to get a sense of do families want to continue this service, or would they be interested in continuing this service? So we could see at the end if the people were sort of more annoyed by it, or they actually enjoyed what they got. And so here's what we found, and this might be unsurprising to many of you, but I'll have a little bit of a follow-up to this. This is what enrollment looked like in each group. So you don't see anything by the standard group because you could basically count on one hand the number of families who opt in via the website. We had about 7,000 families across these 4 groups, and I think it's literally single digits signed in via the website. In the simplified condition, this was about 8% or so enrollment, who just would text us back start. And then in the opt-out group, we had 96% enrollment. So only 4% of families ever asked us to stop sending text messages. So really huge take-up in the opt-out group versus even the simplified group. So dramatic differences in take-up, and kind of the story you can immediately tell is, look, if you're going to do virtually any form of opt-in to this platform, you might as well kind of set your money on fire, because nobody's going to end up using it, and that's going to have direct impacts on the efficacy of the intervention on grades as well. So here's what we see in terms of GPA. Basically, 0 effects in the 2 opt-in conditions. They're small, statistically insignificant. We see about a 0.10 effect on GPA in the opt-out condition, or the automatic enrollment condition. This is statistically significant. And then in terms of course failures, we do see some movement in the simplified condition in light blue here, but this is not statistically significant. But we see substantial reductions for the automatic enrollment group, about a 25% reduction in course failures. And it's actually a little bit even bigger than that for those who receive the text messages as well. It's even more sizable. So again, the opt-in versus opt-out policies had direct implications for enrollment and in turn efficacy. We actually did a follow-up survey where we asked parents, are you still interested in continuing the system? And actually those who were in the opt-in group, opt-out group, were actually more likely to want to continue the service relative to those in the opt-in group. So it was as if families, once they had to turn it on for them, they started learning about its benefits and were more likely to want to continue. We did a follow-up work outside of DCPS, but actually including some folks at DCPS in a Harvard executive education course where we had about 100 principals and superintendents, and we asked them, hey, can you guess what the take-up rates under each of these conditions will be? And a lot of these school district leaders tended to vastly overstate what take-up would be in the opt-in condition, especially the simplified opt-in condition. And they tend to understate what take-up would be in the opt-out condition. So kind of one explanation for why aren't school districts making more policies opt out for this particular intervention is that they're kind of understating the dramatic differences in, that these policies can induce if they switch from one to the other. So the upshot is, how these technologies are effective, but just because you have something effective doesn't mean that folks will actually use it, and how it's rolled out really makes a difference. At the end, Vincent was kind enough to invite us back to present our findings to the family engagement team there, and that was great for me, because we want this research not just to be seen by other researchers, but to be seen by policymakers, which Vincent Kwan mentioned at the start of the presentation, so that we could discuss, even if DCPS starts to use a new learning management system, how can we figure out ways to take what we've learned previously and leverage it in whatever new system they're using here. I don't know, Vincent, if you had anything further to add to that.
Yeah, no, I did. Those times that we've had you back to either talk with the team or talk to like a broader audience, or even some of our philanthropic friends in DC who are interested in family engagement work. I mean, it's a way to close the circle for sure, but it's also a way to kind of like keep the moving learning forward. I'll say that like one outcome of our work together has been that. Because we know from real research, from rigorous research outcomes, something to be true, it positions us as leaders among other public school districts on this topic. And so Denver public schools, right, or Oakland public schools, they're in places where they are about the same size as we are, and they think about, they face similar kinds of like policy challenges, they face similar kinds of phone calls with vendors that they're trying to decide whether or not to work with. They're choosing among strategies, right? And so to be able to know that in a public school district, when you do A, B is true, right? Like that's been really helpful for us.
Great, thanks. So that wraps it up on our end. Looking forward to hearing everybody's questions.
Great. Thanks so much for that very helpful overview, Peter and Vincent Baxter. Yes, we realize it might be confusing switching between the two Vincents. Anyways, so moving on, I'd like to walk you through the Education Technology and Opportunity Innovation Competition, which is, I think, what most of you are here for to learn about. So the goal of the EdTech competition is to identify and incubate promising ideas for evaluation and to help education leaders develop these ideas into full randomized evaluations in close partnership with JPAL staff and affiliated academic researchers of JPAL, such as Peter. So why do a competition model? So as decision makers and practitioners, you all have the most insight into the most practical and policy relevant questions that you'd like to answer. Yet we recognize that even the most committed education leaders may not have the technical expertise, resources, or connections to leading and experienced researchers who can carry out a high quality evaluation. So this competition is really meant to bridge that gap between education decision makers, practitioners, and also researchers. And so through this competition, education leaders can apply for pro bono technical support from JPAL staff to develop a new evaluation and to scope out a new evaluation, trainings about data and evaluation, and also connections with JPAL's network of leading academic researchers who can really help carry out and execute this study once it's mature enough. And selected participants may also be eligible for up to $50,000 in funding that is meant to really cover the costs associated with preparing for and developing a new evaluation. So who is eligible to apply? School districts, school networks, local and state education agencies, CMOs, post-secondary institutions, and education nonprofits are all organizations that are eligible to apply for the EdTech competition. I also wanted to mention that if you are an EdTech company and you are currently partnering with any of these aforementioned categories, you can jointly apply by submitting a letter of support to support the application from one of these aforementioned categories. And so what are we really looking for in the letters of interest from education leaders? So as I mentioned, this competition focuses on education technology and innovation, but we define education technology quite broadly. A few topics you might be interested in exploring could be computer-assisted learning software, lower-cost technologies, for example, the technology that Peter and Vincent Baxter described earlier to increase family engagement. It also could be related to learning management systems, online learning platforms. And given that education technology, there almost seems to be a technology for every single challenge that has emerged in the educational system, we are very open to ideas that we as a research institution have not yet thought of, but you know and are currently exploring. And so to apply, it's quite simple. All you have to do is submit a 3- to 5-page letter of interest that describes a couple of components. First of all, what is the policy question or challenge that is motivating your application? For example, is it related to ways to decrease the dropout rate in your high school? What is the program in particular that you would like to evaluate? How many people are currently being reached or do you anticipate will be reached by your program? And what are some potential opportunities for a randomized evaluation? And so, of course, we're not looking for you to have it all figured out, but at least having some initial ideas of how a randomized evaluation might work in your context would be very helpful. And, of course, being able to measure outcomes also is dependent on the type of data that you're able to access. So we'd like the letter of interest to describe the access to data for measuring outcomes. So this is a high-level timeline. April 13th, 2018, which coincidentally is Friday the 13th, is the deadline to submit letters of interest. And from late April to early May of 2018, finalists will be invited for interviews and asked to submit additional information, including a proposed budget if you would like to request $50,000 in funding to support the project. And in June 2018, we plan to announce the initial cohort of winners from this competition. And of course, a lot more of this information can be found online. I'd highly recommend you to visit povertyactionlab.org/edtech for more information. So what are some characteristics of a strong application? This might go without saying, but we are interested in programs that truly have the potential to improve student achievement through technology and innovation. Of course, as researchers, we're interested in doing research, but this competition is really meant not for research's sake, but research that can truly have an impact. So we really want to be looking at EdTech programs and innovative programs that can really move the dial. Given that we are JPAL, the Poverty Action Lab, we have a focus on helping disadvantaged students. And so we are particularly interested in programs and issues that have a disproportionate impact on disadvantaged populations, and really addresses questions that are crucial to understanding pressing education issues as they relate to disadvantaged communities, and potentially could be scalable and translatable to other contexts. We also want the application to outline a clearly defined program and also outcomes of interest. And of course, we know that outcomes of interest is something that you might seek additional guidance on. And so, of course, I encourage you to reach out if you have any questions about whether or not your particular program kind of fits what we're looking for, and also how we might think about measuring specific outcomes of interest. And in your application, you should discuss things such as the potential sample size. So what is the scope of the project? For example, are you planning to work with 2 schools or 200 schools? And also the availability of data, and particularly administrative data. And administrative data is essentially data that's already being collected for non-research purposes, such as test scores, graduation rates, but can be very useful in terms of tracking outcomes, and also is a pretty effective way at reducing the cost of evaluation. And also, willingness and feasibility of randomization. As I mentioned earlier, randomized evaluations are not the only approach to do program and impact evaluation, but given that this competition focuses on randomized evaluations, we want applications to indicate a commitment to at least exploring how a randomized evaluation might work and whether a randomized evaluation would be feasible. And of course, we're looking for organizations who have capacity and also commitment to carry out a randomized evaluation and to work closely with JPAL staff and our affiliated researchers to explore what a research project could look like. So at this point, I would like to invite questions from participants, and I also want to highlight a few helpful resources on this next slide. So feel free to send over any questions. So we received a question about whether or not institutions in other countries are eligible to apply for this potential funding opportunity. So in this case, this competition is only open to organizations that are based in the United States. This focus really is on domestic policy issues and how the use of education technology can move the dial on pressing challenges in the United States education system. We also received a question on what is the best way to get more guidance on what exactly the RCT should look like, given that some organizations have limited experience exploring randomized evaluations. And so I would encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions about how a randomized evaluation might fit in the context of your specific program. And I also wanted to mention that one of the benefits of being selected for this competition is that you do receive expertise from JPAL staff and also JPAL affiliated researchers to figure out how a randomized evaluation will work. So of course you don't need to have it all figured out initially. One role that we play is we help you figure it out. But I strongly encourage anybody with questions on how randomization might fit in to reach out to us and we can have a separate phone call about it. We also received a question relating to the expected timeline for competition winners. Is the award intended to be used over 1 year or more? And do you expect the winners to be running multi-year RCTs? So this really depends, and I think it also relates to a common question we get about how long do RCTs take. In some instances, randomized evaluations can be done in just about 1 semester if that is the duration of time that you're interested in. So if it's a program that's being rolled out for a semester and you're trying to see whether or not it improved academic outcomes after a semester, it could be as short as that. But in some instances, it could stretch out to a year or also several years. So the funding that is being provided is fairly flexible and can be used to really help develop this randomized evaluation. I do want to note that the purpose of this competition is to incubate promising ideas and help them get to a point where they are mature enough to be carried out by a JPAL-affiliated researcher, at which point the JPAL-affiliated researcher could apply for additional funding if they want to carry out a multi-year RCT. We received a question about, is there a minimum sample size? And also another question about how many applications we intend to support. So in response to the second question, we currently think that we will be able to support 2 to 3 new partners as a part of this initial cohort of applications. And then relating to the minimum sample size, this is a question that JPAL staff get a lot of the time, and the answer is that it really does depend on the types of outcomes that you're interested in measuring, the type of research question that you're asking. But I would generally, as a rule of thumb, say if it's only a dozen or so students, that probably is not enough of a sample size. And then if it is somewhere higher, let's say hundreds of students or thousands of students, then I think you're definitely more in the ballpark of what an appropriate sample size is. But of course, one role that the technical assistance JPAL will be providing is to help you figure out what is the appropriate sample size, and we can also work on doing power calculations that can give you a more precise estimate of what sample size is appropriate given the program that you want to evaluate. So we received a question about the type of education technology that we might be interested in evaluating and whether or not the technology needs to be in the hands of students. And in this case, as I mentioned earlier, we are defining education technology quite broadly. It's basically any type of technology that could potentially improve student achievement. So it does not need to be in the hands of students. It could be something that works directly with parents but might have some type of effect on student achievement. It could be an education technology that interfaces with teachers but still has a potential effect on student outcomes. So Vincent Baxter, we actually received a question for you. Somebody was interested in learning more about the reason you wanted to participate in a randomized evaluation as a person from the district, and how did you get others at DC Public Schools on board with this idea?
Yep. So I was, I would say, kind of like preheated to the idea. So a little bit before I met Peter, we were already kind of like in the randomized controlled trial mindset and zone because we had applied for a Department of Education I-3 grant. And when you apply for those big kinds of grants, you have to have an evaluation strategy and an evaluation partner proposed, and we really wanted the grant. And so we tried to like think about what is the most rigorous way possible that we could evaluate this work. And we ended up going for a randomized control trial. I mean, that was that. So yeah, we already had that project in motion. And then I just spent a lot, I'd been spending a lot of time with these folks who do RCTs, research economists and the like, doing this other project. And so it was conversant, I think. And, you know, like inside of a big public school district, I don't think this is too much of a blanket statement. It's pretty rare for kind of like project leaders to say on the front end, you know what, like we want to make sure that we're not just kind of like seeing how this is going in an iterative kind of way. I mean, I think that as educators we get a lot of kind of like pressure to like understand that we are in a school year cycle, and so like we are always doing kind of like action research, right? Like we're always trying to understand what's working and not working so that tomorrow can be better. I was kind of like in a rare position to say like, yes, we should do that, but also we should really kind of like make more economic decisions about what's working and not what's not working, so that in future years we can put our resources into things that we know for sure work in our context. And I think that, you know, like folks by and large that work in a district setting have studied, have some research methodology background and haven't really made it their work. I certainly have not made it my full-time work, but can appreciate that the more kind of like rigorous lens we put on something, the more we can be confident that it's true. And at the end of the day, like we're spending taxpayers' dollars, we're spending philanthropists' dollars, and we want to make sure that we're making a good investment of people's dollars, right? And so we really need to, because we're accountable.
Great, thanks so much, Vincent. And another question we received was, what are some common reasons to apply for the $50,000 in funding? And so we are fairly flexible in terms of what the $50,000 can be used for, as long as it is being used to help develop the evaluation. But some common reasons include personnel costs for existing program staff or managers and data analysts who will contribute to the evaluation, or also personnel costs for temporary staff or maybe consultants being hired for specific purposes. Let's say if you have an administrator who will help implement the random assignment, or a short-term research assistant to link administrative data sets. Or also if there are certain costs that are associated with developing and fielding test survey instruments, and also costs related to survey collection or doing interviews. And so generally speaking, costs that are associated with advancing and developing the evaluation. One thing that the funding probably should not be used for is related to direct implementation of a program. So let's say if you are purchasing a lot of new software for the district, this grant opportunity is probably not as good of a fit for that. All right. Well, thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. And I would encourage everybody to reach out if you have any additional questions. Feel free to go to www.povertyactionlab.org/edtech, or feel free to reach out to me, Vincent Kwan, at kwanb@mit.edu if you have any additional questions about the application process and also the timeline. So thank you very much today. And for those who could not join us today, this will also be recorded and uploaded onto our website in case it's helpful to pass along to other people. So thank you very much, and have a great day.